The crimson winds of Proxima 7 howled across the desolate landscape, carrying grains of rust-colored sand that stung like needles against exposed skin. Bradley Shawn pressed himself lower behind the crumbling boulder, his Mark 7 precision rifle steady against his shoulder despite the brutal gusts that threatened to throw off his aim. His piercing blue eyes, weathered by countless campaigns across the outer rim, tracked the distant target through his scope's enhanced optics. "You're insane," Niara Tari whispered beside him, her azure skin gleaming with a faint bioluminescence that betrayed her alien heritage. Her long blue hair whipped in the wind as she peered through her own tactical binoculars at the impossibly distant facility. "No one can make that shot. 4.7 kilometers, Bradley." Against these winds with planetary curvature. "Watch and learn, beautiful," Bradley interrupted, though his usual cocky smirk felt hollow against the weight of their mission. His neatly trimmed beard couldn't hide the tension in his jaw as he made minute adjustments to his rifle's scope. The facility's targeting system needed to be disabled with surgical precision. One shot, one chance, or their infiltration would turn into a massacre. Niara's amber eyes flickered with worry. In the 3 years they'd served together in the Galactic Special Operations Division, she'd seen Bradley make shots that defied physics and logic. But this one felt different. The ancient facility squatted on the horizon like a metallic tumor, its defense systems ready to incinerate anything within a kilometer radius. Only the precision destruction of its main targeting array would create the window they needed. The wind died for a heartbeat. Bradley's finger found the trigger, his breathing steady and controlled. Time seemed to slow as he felt the familiar weight of the rifle, the cool metal against his cheek, the subtle vibration of the weapon's advanced targeting systems syncing with his neural implants. This was what he lived for, the moment between heartbeats when skill, instinct, and impossibility converged into a single perfect action. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with a sound like thunder. The hypersonic round tore through the thin atmosphere, its trajectory adjusted by micro-corrections calculated in real time. Bradley watched through his scope as the projectile covered the impossible distance in seconds, striking the facility's targeting array with devastating precision. Sparks erupted from the structure as secondary explosions cascaded through its systems. The massive blast doors ground open with a mechanical groan that echoed across the wasteland. "Impossible," Niara breathed, but her voice carried no joy, only a growing dread that had been building since they'd received this assignment. As they descended into the facility's depths, their boots echoing against ancient metal corridors, Bradley couldn't shake the feeling that his perfect shot had just opened the door to something far worse than they'd been prepared for. The walls hummed with an energy that felt wrong, alien in a way that had nothing to do with Niara's exotic heritage. Deep in the facility's core, past dormant security systems, and through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent life, they found it. Not just a weapons platform, but a countdown timer displaying numbers that made Bradley's blood run cold. 47 hours until planetary sterilization, and as emergency broadcasts crackled through their communications, they learned the horrible truth. This facility wasn't alone. Across the galaxy, dozens of similar installations were awakening, their countdown timers synchronized for a simultaneous detonation that would cleanse entire star systems of life. The perfect shot had been the easy part. The GSOD briefing room felt colder than the void of space as Admiral Chen's holographic image flickered with urgent desperation. Bradley and Niara sat in uncomfortable silence, still covered in the crimson dust of Proxima 7, as the scope of their nightmare became clear. 17 facilities have been confirmed active. Chen's voice crackled through the damaged communicator they'd salvaged from the first site. Each one counts down to systematic genocide. Our xenoarchaeologists believe these are architect weapons, designed to reset galactic civilization when it becomes too advanced. Bradley's fingers drummed against the table's metal surface. "You're telling us some ancient alien race built a galaxy-wide reset button?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, Shawn. And you two are the only operatives who've successfully infiltrated one of these sites." Chen's image wavered as interference disrupted the signal. We're assembling teams for simultaneous strikes, but we need you to take point on the Kepler 442 facility. Intelligence suggests it's a control hub. Niara's bioluminescent, skin pulsed with agitation. Admiral, with respect, we barely made it out of Proxima 7. The defenses on these sites will adapt to our previous tactics, Chen interrupted, which is why we're sending in Extraction Team Phoenix with you. The best of the best. 3 days. Later, Bradley crouched in the sulfurous atmosphere of Kepler 442b, watching the second architect facility through his scope. This one was larger, more complex, with energy shields that shimmered like aurora around its perimeter. Team Phoenix, 12 elite operatives, had positioned themselves for a coordinated assault while Bradley sought the perfect vantage point for another impossible shot. Target acquired, he whispered into his comm. Shield generator, northwest tower, range, 3.8 kilometers. Copy that, Overwatch, came the reply from Phoenix leader. Beginning approach. The shot was textbook perfect, a hypersonic round that punched through the facility's shields like tissue paper. The energy barriers collapsed in cascading waves of light, and Phoenix team moved in with practiced precision. Then everything went wrong. The facility's defenses hadn't been sleeping. They'd been learning. Automated turrets rose from hidden positions, their targeting algorithms already adapted to counter-human tactics. Bradley watched in horror through his scope as Phoenix team was caught in a crossfire that turned their precision advance into a desperate fight for survival. Phoenix leader, get your people out of there, Bradley shouted, already adjusting his position to provide covering fire. Negative, Overwatch. Mission first. We've got... The transmission cut to static as an explosion lit up the facility's entrance. Bradley's rifle spoke again and again, each shot precise and deadly as he picked off defensive positions. But for every turret he destroyed, 2 more emerged. Through his scope he watched Phoenix team's numbers dwindle. 12 became 8, then 5, then 3. Bradley, Niara's voice crackled through the comm. I'm reading massive energy buildup. They're overloading the facility. He saw it then, a group of figures moving through the chaos, not GSOD operatives, but mercenaries in unmarked armor, systematically executing the wounded Phoenix team members. Someone had sold them out. Bradley lined up his shot on the mercenary leader, a perfect headshot at 4 kilometers. His finger tightened on the trigger just as a small figure darted into his field of view. A child, alien features twisted with terror, fleeing the violence. The shot was already in motion when Bradley saw her. The hypersonic round, deflected by a piece of debris from his previous shots, ricocheted at an impossible angle. Time slowed as he watched his perfect bullet find the worst possible target. The child dropped without a sound. Through his scope, Bradley saw Niara's horrified expression as she reached the girl's body. Her amber eyes found him across the battlefield, and in them he saw something he'd never seen before, doubt in his perfection. The facility exploded behind them in a pillar of fire that reached toward the alien sky. Phoenix team was gone. The mercenaries had escaped. And somewhere in the wreckage lay the body of an innocent whose only crime had been being in the path of his impossible shot. For the first time in his career, Bradley Shawn had failed when it mattered most. The debriefing felt more like a funeral. Admiral Chen's hologram flickered with barely contained rage as casualty reports scrolled past in endless columns of red text. 17 GSOD teams had struck simultaneously across the galaxy. 12 facilities, destroyed but at a cost that made victory taste like ashes. 67 operatives dead. Chen's voice was hollow. Including all of Phoenix team. The mercenary involvement suggests someone with high-level clearance is feeding intelligence to hostile forces. Bradley sat in the sterile medical bay of the GSOD carrier Prometheus, his hands still trembling from the stim injections they'd used to keep him conscious during the 40-hour extraction. Beside him, Niara's wounds had been sealed with biofoam, but the damage to her spirit ran deeper than any blade could cut. The girl, Bradley said quietly, on Kepler 442. I need to know. Was named Xylia Mortai, Chen interrupted, his expression hardening. 7 years old. Her family had been hiding in the facility ruins for weeks, scavenging for supplies. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Your ricochet severed her spinal column. Death was instantaneous. The words hit Bradley like a physical blow. In 15 years of active service, through countless impossible shots across dozens of worlds, he'd never killed an innocent. His perfect record, his legendary precision, it all meant nothing now. Admiral, Niara spoke for the first time since their extraction, her voice barely a whisper. What about the remaining facilities? Chen's image wavered as he accessed classified files. 5 installations remain active, but the Joint Chiefs have made their decision. His expression grew grim. Operation Architect Shutdown is being classified as too high risk. We're pulling back to defensive positions and hoping we can intercept the final activation signal when it comes. You're abandoning the mission? Bradley's voice carried a dangerous edge. Those facilities will sterilize inhabited systems. Billions will die. The mathematics are clear, Sean. Sending more teams against adapted defenses and hostile intelligence leaks will only result in more casualties. We'll fortify key systems and hope our fleet assets can... Hope? Niara's bioluminescence flared with anger. You're going to let entire civilizations burn because you hope the fleet can stop weapons designed by a species that conquered the galaxy? Chen's hologram flickered again, this time with what looked like genuine regret. The decision is final. Prometheus will deliver you to Sanctuary Station for extended debriefing and psychological evaluation. The transmission ended, leaving them alone in the medical bay's sterile silence. Through the porthole, Bradley could see the swirling nebula of the Kepler system, its beauty tainted now by the memory of a child's lifeless eyes. 3 days, Niara said softly. What? The facilities that are left. Intelligence estimated 3 days before their countdown completes. She stood, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. 17 hours to Sanctuary Station. 16 hours for processing. Then we're civilians again, watching the news feeds as systems go dark. Bradley met her amber eyes, seeing in them the same desperate resolve that had driven them through impossible missions across the rim worlds. The nearest facility is in the Vega system. 2 days' travel at maximum burn. In what ship? Command isn't going to loan us a cruiser for a suicide mission. No, Bradley agreed, his mind already working through the possibilities. But they left a lot of salvage on Kepler 442, including some very expensive mercenary equipment. For the first time since the mission had gone wrong, Niara almost smiled. Stealing enemy assets to prevent galactic genocide. I like it. One problem, Bradley said, checking his rifle case where it lay sealed beside his bunk. My last shot killed an innocent. What if I can't make the impossible ones anymore? Niara's hand found his, her skin warm against his calloused palm. Then, we'll find another way. We always do. But as Prometheus adjusted course toward their inevitable abandonment, both of them knew they were lying to themselves. The countdown continued, indifferent to their doubts, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, ancient weapons prepared to cleanse the galaxy of life. The GSOD had abandoned them, but they hadn't abandoned hope. Not yet. The stolen mercenary vessel, Crimson Fortune, screamed through hyperspace toward the Vega system, its modified engines pushed beyond safe parameters. Bradley hunched over the navigation console, his blue eyes bloodshot from 72 hours without sleep. Every calculation had to be perfect. They had one chance to reach the Architect facility before the countdown reached 0. 8 hours to Vega 3, Niara reported from the pilot's chair, her azure skin pale with exhaustion. The biofoam patches covering her wounds had started to fail, leaking pink fluid that she ignored with stubborn determination. The facility should be visible on long-range sensors in 6. The ship's stolen intelligence files painted a grim picture. The Vega facility wasn't just another weapon. It was the coordination hub, the conductor orchestrating the galaxy's funeral symphony. If they could destroy it, the remaining sites would fall silent. If they failed, 17 star systems would burn in synchronized genocide. You should rest, Bradley said, not looking up from his targeting calculations. I can handle the approach. Can you? The question hung in the recycled air between them. heavy with unspoken fears. Since Kepler 442, something had broken in Bradley's legendary confidence. His shots remained technically perfect, but the spark, that ineffable quality that made impossible shots routine, had died with a 7-year-old girl. Bradley's hands stilled on the console. I don't know. For 3 days they danced around the truth. The man who had never missed, who had built his identity on absolute precision, now doubted his most fundamental skill. And Nyara, who had followed him through fire and vacuum across a dozen worlds, didn't know how to rebuild what guilt had shattered. Tell me about the first time, she said softly. The first what? The first impossible shot. The one that made you believe you could do anything. Bradley leaned back in his chair, his fingers unconsciously stroking his neatly trimmed beard. Titan Station, 8 years ago. Hostage situation. Terrorists had taken the governor's daughter, barricaded themselves in a reactor control room. His voice grew distant. 300 meters of ventilation shaft, 70-degree angle, ricochet shot off a reflective panel to avoid the hostage. But that's not why you remember it. He smiled sadly. No. I remember it because afterward this little girl, couldn't have been more than 10, ran up to me while I was packing my rifle. She said, "Thank you for saving my mommy." Turned out the governor's daughter was pregnant. My shot didn't just save one life. And now? Now I see Zelia Mortai every time. I look through the scope. 7 years old, dead because my perfect shot wasn't perfect enough. Nyara's bioluminescence pulsed with gentle warmth as she moved to stand behind his chair. Her hands found his shoulders, working at the knots of tension that had gathered there, like armor. You know what I see when I watch you shoot? What? Poetry. Every calculation, every breath, every heartbeat between decision and action. It's beautiful, Bradley, like watching someone paint with physics. Her touch sent warmth through muscles that had been rigid with stress for days. Despite everything, the countdown, the impossible odds, the weight of galactic extinction pressing down on them, Bradley felt some of the tension ease from his frame. Even if I can make the shot, he said quietly, we still have to get close enough. The facility's on a dead world, but the orbital defenses are active. We'll need to land at least 50 kilometers out and approach on foot. Then we'd better start suiting up. The next few hours passed in the familiar rhythm of mission preparation, checking weapons, reviewing intelligence files, calculating ammunition loads and backup plans. It felt almost normal, like any of the dozens of operations they'd run together. But underneath the routine lay a desperate knowledge that this was likely their last mission, one way or another. As they entered the Vega system, the facility revealed itself like a malignant star against the planet's terminator line. Massive beyond their worst projections, it sprawled across hundreds of square kilometers, its weapon arrays already charging with the cold fire of ancient technology. Jesus, Bradley breathed. It's not just a control hub, it's a manufacturing center. Through the ship's sensors, they could see the truth. The facility wasn't just coordinating the other sites, it was building more. The countdown wasn't to galactic sterilization, it was to infinite expansion, as the architect weapons multiplied across every inhabited system until nothing remained but silence. New plan, Nyara said grimly. We don't just shut it down. We overload the reactor core, turn the whole facility into a crater. That would require manual activation from inside the reactor chamber. It's a one-way trip. Their eyes met across the cockpit, and in that moment Bradley saw his own certainty, reflected in her amber gaze. They both knew how this would end. The only question was whether they could take the facility with them. Together? She asked. Together, he confirmed. But as crimson fortune descended toward the dead world's surface, Bradley wondered if love could be enough to steady his hands for one final impossible shot. The reactor chamber of the architect facility pulsed with malevolent energy, its ancient crystalline core suspended in a web of force fields that bent light into impossible geometries. Bradley crouched behind a twisted support beam. His Mark 7 rifle trained on the manual override switch, barely visible through the fractured viewport 60 meters above. One shot to trigger the overload. One chance to stop the expansion protocol before it spread like cancer across the galaxy. Beside him, Nyara's breathing came in ragged gasps. The journey through the facility had cost them everything: ammunition, equipment, and finally Nyara's mobility. A shard of crystalline debris from the facility's automated defenses had punched through her armor, severing critical tendons in her legs. She leaned against the reactor chamber's sealed door, her azure skin pale with blood loss, one hand pressed against the manual controls. The countdowns accelerated, she said, her voice barely audible over the reactor's thrumming. 4 minutes until cascade activation. When I trigger the overload, you'll have maybe 30 seconds before the reaction goes critical. Bradley kept his eye pressed to the scope, but his hands trembled with something beyond adrenaline. Through the fractured viewport, he could see the override switch, a simple mechanical toggle, its activation requiring perfect precision through multiple layers of radiation-warped transparency. In ideal conditions, it would be challenging. In a reactor chamber flooding with exotic particles that bent light and distorted perception, it was beyond impossible. "I can't do this," he whispered. "Yes, you can." Nyara's voice carried absolute conviction. "You're Bradley Shawn, you make impossible shots." "I killed a child, Nyara. My perfect shot saved billions." Her amber eyes found his through the chamber's chaotic lighting. "Zelia Mortai died because of war, not because of you. Every shot you've ever taken, every impossible angle you've mastered, it was all leading to this moment." The facility shuddered around them as automated defenses activated one final time. Through the chamber's walls, Bradley could hear the approach of construction drones, already beginning to repair the damage from their infiltration. In minutes, the facility would be whole again, the countdown would complete, and the expansion protocol would seed the galaxy with death. "I have to lock you out," Nyara said, her hand hovering over the chamber's emergency seal. "The overload sequence requires manual monitoring. If the timing's off by even seconds, the cascade will fizzle." Instead of propagating, Bradley's finger tightened on the trigger, but his vision blurred with tears he refused to acknowledge. There has to be another way. There isn't. Nyara's bioluminescence flared one last time, painting the chamber walls with azure light. "And you know it." The truth hit him like a hypersonic round to the chest. From the moment they'd entered the facility, she'd known this was how it would end. Every calculation, every plan they'd made, she'd been working toward this sacrifice from the beginning, hiding her knowledge behind false hope and desperate optimism. "How long have you known?" "Since we analyzed the reactor schematics on the ship. The overload requires constant adjustment to prevent containment failure. Someone has to stay." Her smile was radiant despite the pain-etching lines around her eyes. "It was always going to be me, Bradley. You're the one who makes the impossible shots." The chamber's emergency systems activated with a grinding mechanical roar. Blast doors began to descend, sealing the reactor core from the rest of the facility. Nyara's hand found the manual controls, initiating the overload sequence that would turn the ancient weapon into a miniature star. "You have to make the shot," she said, her voice breaking as the barriers closed between them. "The last one. The impossible one." Bradley pressed his eye to the scope, tears blurring his vision as he lined up the shot through the fractured viewport. The manual override switch wavered in his sight, distorted by radiation and emotion. Around him, the facility began to shake as the reactor core destabilized. Through the sealed chamber's reinforced window, he could see Nyara at the controls, her hands dancing across ancient interfaces as she fought to maintain the reaction's stability. The azure glow of her skin was fading, consumed by the exotic radiation flooding the chamber. "I love you," he whispered into the comm, knowing she could no longer hear him. The rifle's targeting system synced with his neural implants, one final time, calculating trajectories through impossible angles of refracted light. Bradley's breathing steadied, his heartbeat slowing to the familiar rhythm of absolute precision. This was what he was. Not just a soldier, but an instrument of perfect action in an imperfect universe. The shot exploded from the rifle's barrel, with thunder that shook the facility's foundations. The hypersonic round punched through the fractured viewport, through radiation fields that should have destroyed it, through angles of refracted space that defied physics. It struck the manual override switch with perfect precision, triggering the final cascade that would consume the facility and everything within it. The reactor core erupted in blue fire that consumed Niara in light too bright to witness. Bradley was pulled from the wreckage 3 days later by a GSOD rescue team, half dead and clutching the shattered remains of his rifle. The facility was gone, reduced to a crater of fused glass that glowed with residual energy. Across the galaxy, the remaining Architect installations had fallen silent, their countdown displays dark for the first time in eons. The GSOD hailed him a hero. Admiral Chen personally delivered medals that Bradley threw away without looking at them. The news feeds called him the man who saved galactic civilization, but their words felt hollow against the silence where Niara's voice should have been. On the ruins of Proxima 7, Bradley knelt before a makeshift grave, Niara's combat, knife embedded in the crimson sand where she'd made her first impossible shot. The wind howled across the wasteland, carrying dust that tasted of endings and beginnings. "You were right," he whispered to the empty sky. It was impossible. But this time, he couldn't prove her wrong. Bradley Shawn walked alone into the wasteland, his broken rifle slung over his shoulder, forever waiting for another impossible shot he could never make. Behind him, the grave marker caught the light of an alien sun, and somewhere in the vast silence of space, the galaxy continued to turn. Saved by love, loss, and the last perfect shot of an imperfect man, the sniper's war was over. The legend would endure.